broadcast tonight, speculation is high that a trilateral summit between South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. will take place during the Nuclear Security Summit at The Hague next week. Tensions over Crimea show no sign of abating as Russia warns the West of consequences over sanctions imposed on the nation. The incoming central bank governor Lee Ju-yeol answers tough questions at his confirmation hearing today. A look at his vision and some of the challenges that lie ahead. Well, these stories and more next on ARIRANG News at 8. Good evening to our viewers in Korea, and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Wednesday, March 19th here in Seoul. I am Yoo Ji-hye. The momentum for summit talks between Korea, Japan, and the U.S. seems to be gaining steam. The sources in Seoul say the Presidential Office of National Security is looking into the possibility of holding trilateral talks on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague next week. It cited thawing relations between Seoul and Tokyo for the reason behind the move. Last week, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe pledged to honor a previous government apology to Korean women who were forced into sexual slavery during World War II. Seoul has emphasized that talks are of no use if Tokyo doesn't act with sincerity on historical disputes. But a government source says a trilateral summit may be possible, especially considering that the U.S. has asked both Korea and Japan to resolve their differences. And to raise awareness of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women, college students here held demonstrations on campus for the very first time. Now, this is in a show of solidarity with a weekly Wednesday protest where Koreans gather in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. Our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports.
It's been 23 years since the citizens of Seoul began standing in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul every Wednesday alongside the survivors of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement. To this day, they continue to demand a resolution to the unsettled tragedy. This week, the voices extended throughout the capital. These demonstrations urging Japan to apologize for its wartime sexual enslavement of women are being held simultaneously at 12 universities across Seoul. Now, by doing so, these college students are trying to cast light on the so-called comfort women issue.
Although the comfort women issue is making headlines at home and abroad, no action has been taken to resolve the issue. I decided to participate, hoping the students' voices could help resolve the matter.
The issue has become the biggest thorn in Korea-Japan relations. Seoul stressed Tuesday that Tokyo must take sincere steps in resolving the comfort women issue amid speculation of a possible summit between the two neighbors at next week's Nuclear Security Summit at The Hague. Since taking office last year, President Park Geun-hye has refused to meet with their Japanese counterpart, criticizing him for his distorted perception of history. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military during the Second World War. Only 55 Korean survivors remain alive today, still waiting for a heartfelt apology from Japan. Back on campus, the students hope their efforts will contribute toward healing decades of pain.
I hope the comfort women whose human rights have been violated will be compensated, and I think our demonstrations will help create a society where justice can be practiced.
Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
But China has shed some light on the country's top nuclear envoy's visit to Pyongyang. Beijing's foreign ministry spokesperson told reporters on Wednesday that Woo Tae arrived in North Korea on Monday for discussions on the state of affairs on the Korean peninsula and the resumption of the six-party talks that have been stalled since late 2008. His trip follows one by Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Liu Zhenmin last week. The back-to-back visits are aimed at bringing Pyongyang back to table for a denuclearization dialogue that involves two Koreas, U.S., China, Japan, and Russia. Speaking of engaging with North Korea, Japan's Red Cross and government officials resumed talks with their North Korean counterparts in China's northeastern city of Shenyang on Wednesday. During the two-day meeting, the two sides are expected to discuss Pyongyang's return of the remains of Japanese nationals from the end of World War II, a topic that follows up on the previous round of talks earlier this month. But more attention lies over an informal meeting between foreign ministry officials from the two sides. Japan will likely demand an investigation into North Korea's abduction of Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s. Pyongyang, meanwhile, is expected to ask Tokyo to ease sanctions on the regime. North Korea and Japan reopened dialogue 2 weeks ago for the first time in more than a year. President Park Geun-hye has not minced words over her drive toward deregulation in recent days, going as far as to describe red tape as a lump of cancer. But is everyone on board with her idea? Well, she's likely to find out on Thursday during a 4-hour-long public discussion with business leaders and government officials. Our Song Ji-sun has details.
The ministerial-level meeting concerning deregulation that President Park Geun-hye vowed to preside over has turned into a much broader discussion between the government and private sector. At 2 p.m. on Thursday, government officials and some 50 businessmen will sit down to discuss the government's push toward deregulation. Attendees will range from representatives of major economic organizations and large conglomerates to small and medium-sized companies who are expected to express their opinions on the reform proposals. President Park has stressed that deregulation, particularly in the service sector, is a key part of our creative economy vision. She has called repeatedly for lifting and relaxing regulations in a bold manner to help business build on creative ideas, saying deregulation is the fastest and easiest way to spur economic growth for the people. In a speech marking her first year in office last month, President Park reiterated her dedication toward reform.
이 모든 규제 개혁의 과정 하나하나를 제가 규제 장관 회의를 통해 직접 챙겨 나갈 것입니다.
Thursday's 4-hour discussion will be televised nationwide, completely unfiltered.
The discussion will proceed with enough time to discuss all subjects on the table, and the whole process will be open to the media.
Further details on the format and participants are set to be released Thursday before the meeting begins. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
A South Korea spy agency under fire for allegedly abusing its power is caught up in yet another scandal, this time over forged documents. It is the first time an agent has been arrested for acts committed in the line of duty. Our Choi Sun reports.
Prosecutors have arrested a South Korean intelligence agent on charges of forging documents in a scandal underlining the need to reform the country's spy agency. This is the first time an agent from the National Intelligence Service has been detained in connection with the agency's spying activities. The Seoul Central District Court on Wednesday issued an arrest warrant for the agent identified only as his surname Kim for ordering an informant last December to obtain documents that refute claims made by the Chinese police. The documents show a former Seoul city government worker accused of being a North Korean spy entered the reclusive nation, but China's security forces had previously denied issuing China-North Korea border crossing records of him. Kim denies he knew about the forgery, while the informant, who had tried to commit suicide earlier this month, claims he was paid and ordered by South Korea's state intelligence agency to counterfeit the papers. Prosecutors are also probing a consul at the South Korean Consulate General in China's northeastern Shenyang city who handed over the forged papers. The consul has told investigators that he did not know anything about the authenticity of the papers. The investigation into forgery has now expanded to China, where a team from South Korea and the Chinese Security Ministry plan to determine the authenticity of the documents in question. The latest scandal has severely hurt the credibility of South Korea's spy agency, which had been at the center of a political scandal for allegedly interfering in the 2012 presidential election to rally support behind the ruling party candidate. Choi Yu-sun, ARIRANG News.
Rights Council in Geneva.
for the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world. Join Yoo Ji-hye for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Move aimed at fostering startups is part of the government's 3-year economic innovation plan. Lawmakers of the Strategy and Finance Committee made it official on Wednesday, confirming Lee Ju-yeol's nomination as the next Bank of Korean governor. The stamp of approval came after the first confirmation hearing in the central bank's 60-year history. He'll take office April 1st. ARIRANG News' Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Lee Ju-yeol, a veteran Bank of Korea official tapped as its next governor, appeared for a parliamentary confirmation hearing on Wednesday. He said the central bank should focus not only on the nation's inflation rate, but also on growth. Lee, however, dismissed market expectations of a rate cut.
Inflation is not a major threat to the Korean economy now, so it's right to focus on growth. But the current interest rate level does not seem to be an obstacle in the nation's economic recovery.
Experts say his comments are realistic, with many believing that the rate has been kept at low levels for too long. They predict that the central bank could act on it in the coming months.
Eventually, when Central Bank of industrialized countries, especially USA, show the symptom of increasing the interest rate, then Bank of Korea will also make a move, the move of increasing interest rate.
During the hearing, he also said that he fully acknowledges the importance of communicating with the market. He added that the central bank has to regain the trust of the people. He also conceded that the central bank did not communicate effectively with the market last April when it kept its key rate unchanged.
The market had high expectations of a rate cut, and that's because the central bank had sent signals to the market. I believe there was a problem in communication.
Lee's confirmation hearing went smoothly with no major moral issues, setting his appointment back. Right after the hearing, lawmakers accepted his nomination, which is very unusual. Lee takes office April 1st, replacing outgoing Governor Kim Jung-soo. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
And now to some very welcome news for Korea's automakers. New data shows Korean-made cars made up nearly 9% of China's auto market last year, its largest ever market share in the world's second largest economy. The Korea Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade says Korean automakers, including Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, sold around 1.6 million units in China in 2013. Korean auto sales in China have been on the rise for 3 consecutive years now. Experts say Korean automakers should refocus their marketing from small budget models to larger, more expensive models, as the Chinese market for sedans, SUVs, and multi-purpose vehicles is on the rise. Consumer interest in electric vehicles around the globe is growing, mainly because they're cost-efficient and eco-friendly. Well, here in Korea, the country's southern resort island of Jeju is emerging as a testbed for EVs. Na Young-kyung has this report.
Korea had about 2,000 electric vehicle charging stations as of the end of last year, and a quarter of those are on Jeju Island, which only covers about 2% of Korea's territory. Jeju officials have been pushing to transform the island into a carbon-free zone, saying there is only about 200 kilometers of road around the coast, and the island is not as hilly as the mainland.
It helps a lot that Jeju is an island. This initiative is part of a smart grid project started 7 years ago. Currently, there are 497 charging facilities on Jeju Island, making it one of the world's best places with an EV charging infrastructure.
So far, Jeju Island has about 360 electric vehicles running, and by the year 2030, it plans to up that number to 370,000. And people are definitely becoming more aware of the merits of owning one of these vehicles. The government's move to provide subsidies for new EV owners has also helped make them more popular. Including tax breaks, the subsidies can mount to as much as $22,000 or potentially half the purchase price.
I've been waiting for the past 6 months because I heard about the government subsidies.
I didn't think it was going to be nice, but it's a lot better than I expected. It's comfortable and quiet.
Jeju Island began offering EV rental car services at the start of the year as well. There are about 30 electric cars ready to be rented out, with 10 per week rented on average as of now. Officials plan to make another 30 cars available for rental by the end of the year. 나현경, 아리랑 뉴스, 제주.
The Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics has retained its top ranking as the preferred IT brand for consumers in the U.S. and Europe, while Apple has dropped the spot to 5th. This is according to a survey conducted by U.S.-based market researcher Strategy Analytics of just under 6,200 respondents during the months of December and January. Samsung was followed by Sony and Microsoft, and HP ranked 4th, beating Apple. Analysts attribute Apple's weak performance to a lack of new products. Korea's LG Electronics climbed up from 7th to 6th place. The National Kugak Center kicks off its new season with Jongmyo Jaereak, a traditional royal court music this week. The ritual music is not only Korea's #1 cultural property, it is also a UNESCO masterpiece. Park Ji-won has more.
This solemn and graceful music is part of the Jongmyo Jaereak, royal ritual music that has been performed in Korea for more than 600 years. The music was composed in the 15th century by King Sejong the Great, the 4th king of the Joseon dynasty, to honor his royal ancestors and pray for the peace and stability of the country. The music is performed during royal ancestral rites that were once held at least 5 times a year in front of Jongmyo. The structure is an ancient shrine housing the remains of the kings and queens of the Joseon dynasty, the last dynasty of Korea that existed from the 14th to the late 19th century. This collection of instrumental music, song, and dance is Korea's important intangible cultural property #1 and was designated by UNESCO as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity in 2001.
This ritual music is simple rather than showing off rich melodies, as it greets the spirits of our ancestors during ancestral rites. The solemn music calms and soothes the souls of listeners as well.
The royal ancestral rite is now held just once a year at Jongmyo Shrine on the first Sunday in May, and it is very rare for the royal ritual music to be presented on a stage. But for the first time in 5 years, the National Kugak Center will bring the music to the stage in a 70-minute performance held over 2 nights on Thursday and Friday. Starting this week, the National Kugak Center will present a series featuring traditional Korean music and dance, including concerts of royal court music and pansori, a style of narrative singing. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Let's get the latest on the top stories on the global front. From the mounting tension in Crimea to the U.S. Fed's key policy meeting, we go live to Paul Lee at the News Center. Paul, what's the situation like in Ukraine right now?
Well, tensions are high, with reports that Ukrainian soldiers were shot dead just hours after President Vladimir Putin signed a treaty claiming Crimea as Russian territory. It has Western leaders once again emphasizing that the annexation will not be recognized. Our Connie Lee has the details.
In Moscow, the crowds chanted Russia, Russia. And in Crimea, cheers and applause filled the streets after Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a treaty on Tuesday in front of parliament to make Crimea part of Russia.
It is such a momentous day today. We want to say that we are very proud of our President Vladimir Putin.
Putin says Russia must now act as Ukraine's new government. And in front of crowds late Tuesday in Moscow's Red Square, he said Crimea has finally returned to its home port to Russia.
We have done a lot together, but we will do much more. We will need to solve many tasks, but I'm confident that we will overcome everything, resolve everything, because we are together. Glory to Russia!
A different scene in Ukraine's capital, Kiev. Residents there are angry over Putin's latest actions.
I want him to stop mocking our people. I want him to stay in Russia and govern the Russians and not touch our people and not torture Ukraine.
And tensions heightened into violence on Tuesday when masked gunmen killed 2 Ukrainian troops and injured at least 2 others. The Ukrainian military has now been ordered to use their weapons to protect and preserve the life of Ukrainian soldiers. Meanwhile, Western leaders, including those in the U.S. and Germany, have condemned Putin's actions.
We would not recognize this attempted annexation.
But it doesn't seem like the Russian president is showing any signs of backing down. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Right, Paul, staying with the Crimean crisis, Seoul's foreign ministry said in a statement Wednesday that Korea will not recognize President Putin's annexation of Crimea. And this, of course, echoes similar stances taken by other Western powers. But why haven't the U.S. or EU moved forward with stronger sanctions against Russia?
Well, Western leaders want to send a clear message to the Kremlin, but are wary that any damage inflicted on Moscow will negatively impact their own respective economies in the process. Is this potential blowback that President Putin is likely betting on as he moves on Ukraine? So far, the EU has frozen assets and imposed travel bans on 21 Russians and Ukrainians, and the U.S. has imposed similar sanctions on 11 people. At the moment, only politicians, officials, and military commanders have been targeted, but this may change. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden said Tuesday in Warsaw that Washington was committed to defending the security of its NATO allies on Russia's borders while vowing additional sanctions on Moscow.
All right, Paul, let's move to the mystery surrounding Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. I hear the Malaysian government just wrapped up a news conference.
That's right, Jihae. Acting Transport Minister His Hamudin Hussein said that background checks on all but 3 of the 239 people on board have produced no information of significance. But investigators still believe the plane was deliberately diverted either north towards Central Asia or towards the Indian Ocean. And after 12 days, search operations now cover an area of 2.24 million square nautical miles, which is roughly the size of the continental United States.
A much better search opportunity today with a smaller area, closer to Perth, and more aircraft. And I hope we will do better tomorrow, where we expect to have perhaps 4 or 5 aircraft. That all said, we still have grave fears for the safety of anyone that might have managed to escape the aircraft in the Southern Ocean.
Meanwhile, patience is running thin for the families of the victims. Some relatives of the Chinese passengers have threatened to go on hunger strikes unless more information is provided by Malaysian authorities.
Right, and over in the United States, the country's central bank has begun a key policy meeting. What are financial analysts watching for?
The U.S. Federal Reserve's Policy-Making Committee will convene through Wednesday, and all eyes are on Janet Yellen. This is her first meeting as Fed chair. It's widely expected that Yellen will follow in the steps of her predecessor and announce a 3rd round of quantitative easing. The Fed will likely announce a reduction of $10 billion from its monthly bond buying program in April to $55 billion. But what's less clear is how Yellen will guide the Fed on short-term interest rates amid falling U.S. unemployment. The rate, which has been dipping more quickly than expected, fell to 6.7% last month. The results of the meeting are expected to come out early Thursday morning, Korea time. Jie?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. We'll see you back in about 2 hours' time. And time to get a check on the weather with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Now, Bo-kyung, what's the latest?
Well, Jihae, yellow dust is still with us. In fact, Seoul is seeing 157 micrograms per cubic meter, which is about 3 times the normal levels. Taking a look at the current conditions, we're under the influence of a low pressure trough from the south, which is why we're seeing cloudy skies across the map. Well, showers are forecast in the southern region starting later tonight and will spread throughout the country by tomorrow. Total precipitation will only be about 5 to 10 millimeters, but make sure to have an umbrella handy. Other than that, a pre-heavy snowfall watch has been issued on the mountains of Gangwon-do province, where 5 to 20 centimeters will fall through tomorrow. Looking ahead at Thursday's readings, Seoul starts off the day at 6 degrees with a high of 13, while Hague and Busan reach 15. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon and Jeju make it to the low teens, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at 7 and -1 degrees. Back to you, Ji-hye.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul. I'll be back with more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.